We've all watched TV expecting entertainment, drama, and maybe even a good laugh. But what happens when something goes terribly wrong, live on air with millions watching? Yeah, shocking events that left viewers speechless, from heart-stopping rescues to unspeakable tragedies. Here are 10 darkest moments in live TV history ever recorded. Adelier Antonio de Carli. Imagine looking up into the sky and seeing something unbelievable. A man, floating thousands of feet above the ground, held up by hundreds of colorful helium balloons. It sounds like something out of a cartoon, like the beloved animated film Up, where Carl Fredricksen floated his house away using balloons. But believe it or not, something similar happened in real life, an astonishing sight that blurred the line between fiction and reality. But what if I told you there was another balloon story, one that happened a year earlier in April 2008? This story wasn't a hoax. It was very real, and sadly, it didn't have a happy ending. The story begins with Adelier Antonio de Carli, a 41-year-old Brazilian priest with an adventurous spirit and a big dream. Carli wanted to break the world record for cluster balloon flight, basically, flying high into the sky while tied to hundreds of helium balloons. At that time, the benchmark was 19 hours, and Carli had previously tried once, lasting only 4 hours on his initial attempt, and reached an impressive 177,000 feet using 600 balloons. But Carli wasn't done yet. This time, he planned to go all out with 1,000 balloons. Equipped with food, water, a mobile phone, a GPS tracker, a two-way radio, and a parachute, he was prepared for any unexpected turn of events. On April 20th, 2008, he tied the balloons to a chair, took his seat, and floated into the sky. It wasn't just about breaking a record, it was also about raising money for his parish and supporting truck drivers in need. But despite all his careful planning, there was one major blunder occurred when Carli realized he didn't know how to use his GPS. That tiny detail would prove to be a fatal mistake. Just 20 minutes into his flight, he radioed air traffic controllers asking for instructions on how to use the device. You could already sense the worry in his voice. He was worried about the possibility of the Brazilian Navy tracking him down. But without knowing how to operate his GPS, Carli was essentially flying blind. As time went on, things got worse. Carli started drifting off course, far from his intended route. Without GPS, he couldn't tell anyone where he was. Eventually, he radioed in to report that he was losing altitude, but by then, the Navy had lost track of him entirely. There was no way to pinpoint his location, and Carli was completely alone in the sky. 8 hours into his flight, all communication stopped. Carli had vanished. Rescue teams sprang into action. Helicopters and airplanes scoured the skies and the ocean below, searching for any sign of the priest or his colorful cluster of balloons. Days passed and hope began to fade. 2 days later, someone reported seeing colored balloons floating in the ocean off the coast of Santa Catarina. Rescue teams rushed to the area, but again there was no sign of Carli. The search ended without success, and questions remained about his fate. It was suspected that strong winds had pushed him far off course, and most feared the worst. It wasn't until July, a few months later, that the tragic truth came to light. The remains of Carli were located in the ocean near Brazil's southern coastline. DNA tests confirmed his identity. And just like that, the mystery was over. What made this story even more haunting was that Carli's record attempt had been broadcast live on television by Globo TV. Millions of viewers had watched in awe as he floated into the sky, full of hope and ambition. But the news of his disappearance mid-flight left everyone in shock. Upon discovering his remains, his family found some comfort in closure despite the tragedy. However, many couldn't help but reflect on how it could have been avoided. If only Carli had learned to use the GPS, or if someone had double-checked his preparedness before takeoff. The Hillsborough disaster. Have you ever heard of a sports disaster so tragic, so preventable, that it still haunts fans decades later? The Hillsborough disaster is one of the darkest moments in football history. A tragedy that still have a heavy weight of grief rests on the hearts of fans today. It's not just a story about loss, but about how a series of preventable mistakes and poor decisions led to devastating consequences. On April 15, 1989, Liverpool and Nottingham Forest were set to face off in the FA Cup semi-finals at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield, England. The atmosphere was electric, the stadium packed with an expected 53,000 fans, all eager to support their teams. To prevent clashes between the two sets of supporters, authorities decided to keep them separated, with Liverpool fans entering through the terminals, differing in size with one being larger, lead into segregated fenced pens. As kickoff time approached, thousands of Liverpool fans were still outside the stadium, trying to squeeze through narrow entry points. It became chaotic, with over 10,000 fans stuck in bottlenecks on the Leppings Lane side. In a rushed decision, Yorkshire Police Chief Superintendent David Duckenfield ordered an additional gate to be opened to ease the congestion. Around 2,000 fans surged through that gate, but instead of being directed to the side pens, which still had space, they were funneled straight into the already overcrowded central pens through a large tunnel. With the match about to begin, fans rushed forward, unknowingly walking into an overcrowded death trap. The crush began, and people were pressed against each other and the high fences. But the worst part, the police on the ground misread the situation entirely. They assumed the chaos was caused by rowdy, unruly fans and failed to recognize that people were screaming for help and desperately trying to escape the crush. The match kicked off as planned, but within just 5 minutes it became clear that something was horribly wrong. The referee stopped the game, and panic swept across the pitch. Supporters and officers scrambled to pull people from the pens. Fans climbed over fences, others were lifted out, and makeshift stretchers were fashioned from advertising boards to carry the injured and unconscious across the field. TV cameras captured the heartbreaking scenes as lifeless bodies were carried away, and others still trapped in the crush fought for air. By the end of the day, 97 people had lost their lives. But instead of accountability, the immediate response from authorities was blame. Police officials claimed that Liverpool fans were intoxicated and had forced open the gate, causing the crush. David Duckenfield himself perpetuated this false narrative, a story that would later unravel in devastating detail. Years later, investigations exposed the truth. Law enforcement officials were found to have fabricated reports, lied about what happened, and manipulated the narrative to hide their failures. It was discovered that at least 41 lives could have been saved if the proper procedures had been adhered to. In 2014, David Duckenfield admitted he had lied about the gate being forced open. He was ultimately accused of 95 counts of homicide, but was declared innocent. The only person held accountable was Graham Mackrell, the stadium's safety officer, who was fined in 2019 for failing to provide enough turnstiles. Donald Herbert. What drives someone to willingly face life-threatening danger every single day? For Donald Herbert, or Don as his friends called him, the answer was simple: duty and passion. In 1986, Don joined the Buffalo Fire Department and became part of the elite Heavy Rescue Company. This wasn't just any firefighter role, it was for those who had the courage to face the most intense and dangerous situations head-on. While most people would have run the other way, Don embraced it with pride and dedication. Fast forward to December 29, 1995. It was a freezing winter day when Don and his crew received an urgent call. A house on Park Avenue was engulfed in flames. Without hesitation, they rushed to the scene. Firefighters were scrambling, hoses were spraying, and thick smoke filled the sky. A news crew had even arrived, capturing every moment on camera. Don was up in the attic, battling the blaze from above, but what he didn't know was that the fire had weakened the structure beneath him. Suddenly, the roof gave way, and Don fell straight into the burning wreckage below. His team fought desperately to reach him, but Don was trapped under debris, surrounded by smoke, and with almost no air to breathe. For an estimated 6 minutes, Don had no oxygen. By the time they pulled him out, his body was lifeless. His heart had stopped. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, performing CPR along the way. Against all odds, Don survived, but he wasn't the same. He had suffered severe brain damage from oxygen deprivation and slipped into a deep coma. His family stayed by his side, hoping and praying for a miracle. A year later, Don opened his eyes, but he couldn't see. He couldn't speak clearly, he couldn't walk, and he barely recognized his loved ones. It was heartbreaking. For the following 9 years, Don remained in a state of minimal consciousness. His family never gave up on him, but they were told not to expect much improvement. And then on April 30th, 2005, something extraordinary happened. Don's doctor decided to try a new medication, one typically used for Parkinson's disease, ADHD, and depression. No one expected much, but then Don did something incredible. He woke up. Not only did his physical condition improve, but he also regained complete clarity of mind. The first thing he said was, "Where's my wife?" And for the next 14 hours, Don talked almost non-stop. He spoke to his wife, his 4 sons, and the firefighters who had fought alongside him. He laughed, he cried, and he caught up on nearly a decade of lost time. For a few weeks, Don enjoyed life again. He played catch with his sons from his wheelchair, shared stories, and smiled brighter than ever. But tragically, this miracle didn't last. Slowly, Don slipped back into a semi-conscious state. A short time later, he developed pneumonia and spiked a 105-degree fever. His body, already weakened from years of battling injuries and illness, couldn't fight anymore. On February 21st, 2006, Donald Herbert passed away. But Don's legacy didn't end there. He was honored at the National Fallen Firefighters Memorial in Emmitsburg, Maryland, while 2 of his sons became firefighters. The other 2 decided to work in law enforcement. Don's story was so powerful that a book was written about him. The Day Donnie Herbert Woke Up. The Zooksah Park disaster moments on live TV leave an unforgettable mark, and this story is one of them. Between 1994 and 2001, Brazil had one of the most popular children's shows on TV called Zooksah Park, hosted by the charismatic Zooksah, a model, actress, and singer. The show was bright, colorful, and packed with fun games, music, and even cartoon segments. Kids loved it, and it quickly became a staple in households across the country. But on January 11th, 2001, everything changed in the most terrifying way imaginable. The show was being filmed live, with a packed studio audience of kids and their parents. Zooksah was in the middle of a lively musical performance, surrounded by dancers and colorful props. At the center of the stage stood the iconic spaceship prop, a huge structure that Zooksah would emerge from at the start of each show. Unbeknownst to everyone, a short circuit had started a small fire inside the spaceship. A stagehand noticed the smoke and rushed in with a fire extinguisher, but it was already too late. Within moments, the small fire turned into a raging inferno. Flames shot up, plastic props began to melt, and smoke filled the air. Zooksah and her dancers ran for safety while the audience scrambled to escape. The fire spread with terrifying speed, consuming the stage in less than a minute. Cameras kept rolling, capturing the chaos and panic as families fought to find their way out. Amazingly, no one died in the fire. 4 people were treated for burns, and several others suffered from smoke inhalation. But thanks to the bravery of Leonelson, Zooksah's bodyguard, and the show's resident clown, many were pulled to safety. Both men suffered injuries during their rescue efforts and were later hailed as heroes. The aftermath of the fire left Zooksah deeply shaken. She reportedly struggled with severe depression in the months that followed. She stopped performing for a while and took time to visit many of the families who had been in the audience that day. Although she eventually returned to the spotlight, Zooksah Park was cancelled and never aired again. But the tragedy didn't stop there. Rumors began to spread. Some extremist religious groups started claiming that the fire wasn't an accident. They insisted that Zooksah was involved in Satanism and had somehow summoned the fire through a ritualistic performance. Others even claimed she had been laughing while running from the stage. Of course, none of this was true. Video footage clearly showed Zooksah panicking and running for her life, just like everyone else. Investigations concluded that the fire was caused by an electrical fault, not any sinister ritual. Stephen Port, a master chef. Cooking shows are a staple of television, but few are as famous as MasterChef. First airing in the UK on July 2nd, 1990, this show quickly became a worldwide sensation. Amateur chefs from all walks of life step into the kitchen, hoping to impress judges, win a cash prize, and claim the prestigious title of MasterChef champion. The show's success spread globally, leading to adaptations in countries like the United States, Australia, and South Africa. Over the years, many contestants have gone on to become culinary superstars. But not every story tied to MasterChef is one of inspiration. In 2018, during the show's 9th season, a background contestant appeared who carried a dark and disturbing secret. Stephen Port, a man who appeared harmless on the surface but was hiding a horrifying past. Born and raised in East London, Port was often described as quiet and isolated. He was bullied as a child and left school at 16. When his family couldn't afford to send him to art college, he trained as a chef instead. For years, Port worked behind the scenes in kitchens while living a reclusive life. He wore a toupee to hide his hair loss, a detail that became noticeable during his brief appearance on MasterChef. The reason? He hoped the wig would boost his confidence when he went out to nightclubs to meet other men. But beneath this mild exterior was a disturbing reality. Port lied about his life online, claiming he had served in the Navy, attended Oxford University, and worked as a special needs teacher. In truth, he was living a double life. On June 17, 2014, Port met 23-year-old Anthony Woolgate. Using sleep medication, he incapacitated Woolgate and tragically ended his life. Port anonymously called for an ambulance, but it was too late to save Anthony. Over the next year, Port continued his horrifying pattern. His next victim was 22-year-old Gabriel Cavari, followed by 21-year-old Daniel Whitworth and 25-year-old Jack Taylor. Cavari and Whitworth were found in St. Margaret of Antioch Cemetery, while Taylor's body was discovered nearby. In 2015, Port was arrested and charged with 4 murders, 10 instances of poisoning, and several additional serious offenses. His not guilty plea was rendered irrelevant by the overwhelming evidence against him. He received a life sentence without any chance of parole and remains incarcerated at HMP Belmarsh Prison in London to this day. Albert Dryden. What happens when a long-standing feud turns deadly? In June 1991, Harry Collinson, a 46-year-old chief planning officer for the Durham Side District Council in County Durham, England, faced a confrontation he could never have anticipated. Harry's job was clear but challenging: enforce building rules and ensure illegal structures were addressed. But one man, Albert Dryden, wasn't interested in playing by the rules. He had built unauthorized structures on his property, and Harry was assigned to either ensure permits were obtained or have the buildings demolished. So who was Albert Dryden? Born into a family of 8 children, Dryden was described as a loner with a vivid imagination. He struggled academically but had one undeniable passion: firearms. At just 11 years old, Dryden bought his first unlicensed gun, an antique World War I firearm. Finding ammunition for such an old weapon was nearly impossible, so he began making his own bullets. By 17, police raided his home and discovered multiple illegal firearms, marking the start of a concerning pattern. In the 1960s, Dryden got into trouble for firing homemade rockets and threatening local farmers. He even considered moving to Argentina to freely pursue his dangerous hobbies without interference. By 1982, Dryden had lost his job and rented land in Bushfield, where his behavior grew more erratic. He dug a massive pit and started building a structure underground. His excuses kept shifting. First, it was a home for his elderly mother, then a nuclear fallout shelter, and finally a cowshed. None of these explanations added up. After his mother passed away, Dryden became even more hostile. He blamed the council for her death and began making threats, with Harry Collinson becoming a primary target. The council decided the unsafe structure had to go. A demolition team arrived, accompanied by a news crew and Harry himself. But Dryden wasn't going to let this happen quietly. Before demolition could start, Dryden confronted Harry and issued a chilling warning: "You might not be around to see how this ends. You've been warned." Harry stood firm, even telling the cameraman, "Make sure you get a shot of the gun in his hand." Moments later, Dryden raised his firearm and fired Dot. The shot struck Harry Collinson in the chest. Panic followed. People ran for cover as Dryden continued firing. Police arrived and Dryden retreated into a caravan on his property. The standoff was tense. Dryden warned officers about booby traps on the property, but eventually he made a mistake. He stepped outside without his weapon. Police tackled him to the ground and arrested him on the spot. Albert Dryden was later found guilty of all charges and sentenced to 2 life sentences. Niagara Falls Rescue. The most powerful waterfalls in the world, Niagara Falls. The water roars as it crashes over the edge, falling nearly 200 feet below. It's breathtaking, it's beautiful, but it's also unbelievably dangerous. Anyone who ends up in those rushing waters has almost no chance of surviving the drop. But in 2003, something incredible happened. A 59-year-old man, whose identity remains a mystery, was seen unstably hanging on the border of the iconic Horseshoe Falls. And trust me, this rescue story is one you'll never forget. It started like any other day at Niagara Falls. Tourists were snapping photos, enjoying the view, when someone noticed something strange. There, right at the brink of the falls, a man was holding on for dear life. Panicked visitors called for help, and within moments, rescue teams were rushing to the scene. The water was freezing cold, and the current was ferocious. The man later said he managed to wedge his foot into a small crack in the rock, which kept him from being swept away completely. But he was exhausted, and it was clear he couldn't hold on forever. As firefighters and rescue teams arrived, they realized the situation was even worse than they thought. Powerful winds whipped through the area, making any rescue attempt even more dangerous. Still, they had to act fast. A rescue helicopter hovered above him, trying to drop a flotation device. But then, disaster struck. His foot slipped, and he was pulled closer to the edge. Somehow, and this is honestly unbelievable, with remarkable effort, he grabbed onto that very crevice using just one hand. His legs dangled over the edge as thousands of gallons of water rushed past him every second. A flotation device was finally dropped close enough for him to grab, and for a moment it seemed like he might actually be saved. But then he was dragged under an ice shelf near the riverbank. By this point, he had been in the freezing water for nearly 2 hours. He was weak, barely holding on. At this point, rescuers made a bold decision. Instead of hoisting him up by helicopter, one brave team member jumped into the icy water. He fought through the powerful current, reached the man, and successfully fastened a harness around his waist. And somehow the man found the strength to kick against the current while the team on the riverbank pulled with all their might. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they dragged him to safety. Everyone was in shock. The rescuers themselves couldn't believe he had survived. Later, he shared the reason for his dangerous predicament. Earlier that day, he had lost a significant sum at the Seneca Nation Casino, and on top of that, he was deep in $600,000 worth of gambling debt. Overwhelmed and hopeless, he had walked to the falls, but somehow in those icy waters, a survival instinct kicked in. After the rescue, he repeatedly apologized to the team who had risked their lives to save him and thanked them over and over again for not giving up on him. Ruth Thalia Sayas Sanchez. Do you think secrets are better left unsaid? In 2012, a controversial reality TV show called The Moment of Truth aired in Lima, Peru. The show had already gained popularity in other countries, and now it was Peru's turn to dive into its dramatic format. The concept was simple but brutal. Contestants would sit on a stage, hooked up to a polygraph machine, and answer 21 personal and often humiliating questions. Their families and loved ones were sitting in the audience, watching every moment unfold. If they told the truth, they could walk away with a life-changing cash prize. But was the truth worth the price? Enter Ruth Sanchez, the very first contestant on the Peruvian version of the show. On July 7, 2012, Ruth sat in the hot seat with her parents, watching from the audience. They believed she worked at a call center. But the first question cut straight to the core. Do you think your parents would still be proud of you if they knew what you did for a living? Ruth hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but she decided to be honest. In front of millions of viewers, she revealed that as a nightclub hostess, she occasionally accepted compensation for more private engagements. You could feel the tension in the air as her family sat in stunned silence. But Ruth wasn't done. As the questions got harder, her determination grew stronger. She admitted that her relationship with her boyfriend, Russell Romero, wasn't genuine. She remained with him until a better option appeared. In the end, Ruth walked away with $25,000, a life-changing amount in Peru. At that moment, it might have seemed worth it, but the fallout from her confessions was far from over. 2 months after the episode aired, Ruth was found dead in a well on the outskirts of Lima. An autopsy revealed she had been poisoned and strangled. The prime suspect, her boyfriend, Russell Romero. Romero eventually confessed to the crime. He admitted to drugging Ruth with sleeping medication before ending her life with the help of a family member. While his exact motive wasn't fully confirmed, many believe he was humiliated by her public confessions on the show. Others speculate he felt entitled to a portion of her winnings. Bill Shirk. Some stories blur the line between bravery and pure insanity. And Bill Shirk's life is one of them. Born in 1945 in Indianapolis, Indiana, Shirk wasn't just your average guy. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in education from Ball State University in 1968, but his career would go far beyond classrooms. By 1968, Bill became the station manager at Work Radio, but he wore many hats: sales manager, program director, production manager, and even DJ. For 4 years, he kept the station running smoothly until 1972, when he moved on to become general manager at WXLI, another radio station in Indianapolis. Just 2 years later, he bought the station and even purchased a TV station. Despite all his responsibilities, Shirk stayed on the airwaves, becoming a familiar voice well into the 2000s. But radio and TV weren't enough for Bill Shirk. In 1976, he began a second career as an escape artist, following in the footsteps of the legendary Harry Houdini. And he wasn't just good, he was record-breaking good. Between 1976 and 1980, Shirk set 8 world records, including the fastest escape from a straitjacket in under 5 seconds and the fastest escape from a jail cell. One of his most memorable stunts happened in 1977 when he performed an escape to raise money for charity in Marion County. Shirk was buried alive with a python, 2 tarantulas, and a rattlesnake. Yes, really, for 79 hours. The stunt raised $10,000 and even caught the attention of President Jimmy Carter, who made a personal donation. Shirk also starred in a movie called The Escapist, playing a radio station owner fighting off a corporate takeover. While the plot was fictional, the stunts were very real. In one jaw-dropping scene, he escaped from a straitjacket while dangling 1,600 feet above the ground from a helicopter. Throughout his career, Shirk performed some of the most dangerous stunts ever attempted. He was buried alive successfully 10 times, narrowly avoided being run over by a speeding train, and even ran with the bulls in Pamplona while wearing a straitjacket. But here's the twist: he hated every second of it. Shirk confessed that he never relished the danger and only took on the risky stunts to promote his radio and TV stations. But in 1992, Bill decided to attempt his most dangerous stunt, yet a live burial escape in front of TV cameras. He announced he would be handcuffed, placed in a plexiglass coffin, and buried under 14,000 pounds of dirt and concrete. The plan was simple: escape and dig his way to the surface. As cameras rolled, Shirk was lowered into the coffin, handcuffed, and buried under dirt and concrete. But the weight proved too much. The plexiglass coffin cracked, collapsing under the immense pressure. Panic erupted. A backhoe was brought in to dig away the debris, and 2 men with shovels worked desperately to pull Shirk out. Somehow, against all odds, they rescued him alive. Shirk was rushed to the hospital, and despite his severe injuries, he made a full recovery. Shannon Stone. A day at the ballpark should be filled with excitement, cheering for your team, and making unforgettable memories. But for 39-year-old firefighter Shannon Stone, what started as a special outing with his son turned into a heartbreaking disaster. It was July 7, 2011, and Shannon and his 6-year-old son, Cooper, were on their way to Rangers Ballpark in Arlington, Texas. They were there to watch the Texas Rangers take on the Oakland Athletics. Cooper was thrilled he had one goal that day: catch a foul ball as a souvenir. On their way to the game, the father and son duo even stopped at a store to buy Cooper a brand new baseball glove. After taking their seats behind the left field wall, Shannon, wearing his blue Rangers cap and white shirt, was eager for a great day with his son. During the second inning, Connor Jackson hit a foul ball that bounced off the wall and rolled toward Josh Hamilton, the left fielder for the Rangers. Seeing the ball in play, Shannon called out to Hamilton, asking if he could toss the ball up so he could give it to Cooper. Hamilton smiled, grabbed the ball, and tossed it toward Shannon, but the throw fell just short. Shannon leaned over the stadium railing to catch it, but in an instant, he lost his balance and he fell 20 feet, striking the concrete below with his head first. Nearby fans gasped, and one spectator, Ronnie Hares, desperately reached out to grab Shannon but couldn't stop the fall. The cameras caught the initial slip but thankfully didn't show the tragic landing, as it happened behind the scoreboard. When emergency personnel arrived, Shannon was still conscious. His first words were about his son. "Please make sure Cooper is okay." At first, it seemed like he might recover. He was placed on a stretcher, and staff reassured him that Cooper would be taken care of. But tragedy struck again. On the way to the hospital, Shannon went into cardiac arrest, and despite every effort by paramedics, he was pronounced dead upon arrival. The news hit hard. Josh Hamilton, the player who had tossed the ball, was absolutely devastated. The entire Texas Rangers team struggled to process what had happened. Fans across the country started calling for changes. Some argued the stadium railings should be higher, while others thought the team should face consequences. But Shannon's wife, Susan Stone, took a different approach. Instead of blaming the team or Hamilton, she wrote heartfelt letters to Josh Hamilton and the Rangers organization, making it clear that no one was at fault. She encouraged them to keep throwing baseballs to fans, reminding them of how much joy those moments bring. In Shannon's memory, the Texas Rangers erected a bronze statue of him and Cooper outside the stadium. They also set up a memorial fund in his honor. Letters of support poured in from across the country, showing just how deeply the story had touched people. On a memorable day at the ballpark, Cooper Stone was given the honor of throwing the first pitch during a Rangers playoff game against the Tampa Bay Rays. As Josh Hamilton caught the pitch, he walked up to Cooper, wrapped him in a hug, and shared a quiet moment of connection. Share your thoughts below, and if you found this story eye-opening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more real-life stories that prove truth is often stranger and scarier than fiction.